Adolf Hitler was born on the 20th of April in 1889. His birthplace was a small town in Austria called Braunau am Inn, located very near the border with Germany. His father, Alois Hitler, worked as a customs official, a job which required the family to move several times during Adolf's early childhood. His mother was Clara Polzel, who was Alois's third wife. Adolf was the fourth of 6 children born to Clara, but sadly only he and his younger sister Paula survived into adulthood. The early loss of siblings may have cast a shadow over his formative years, influencing his later outlook on life and struggle. Alois Hitler was known to be a rather strict and authoritarian figure in the household. Young Adolf often found himself in conflict with his father, particularly regarding his future aspirations. Alois hoped his son would follow in his footsteps and pursue a career in the civil service, a path that Adolf strongly resisted. In contrast, Adolf reportedly had a closer and more affectionate relationship with his mother, Clara. She was often seen as more indulgent and supportive of her son, perhaps providing a counterbalance to his father's stern demeanor. This dynamic within the family likely played a significant role in shaping young Adolf's personality and his rebellious tendencies. The family experienced further instability due to Alois Hitler's frequent job relocations. They moved from Braunau am Inn to Passau in Germany, then to Lambach, and finally to Leonding near Linz in Austria. These changes meant that Adolf attended several different schools. He did not particularly excel academically, and his school reports often reflected a lack of effort and interest in many subjects, except perhaps for art and history. His dislike for formal education and authority figures became apparent early on, hinting at the defiant nature that would characterize his later life. His father's death in 1903, when Adolf was only 13, was a significant event in his young life. Following his father's passing, Adolf's performance at school did not improve. In fact, it worsened. He eventually left formal schooling altogether at the age of 16 without achieving any significant academic qualifications. His mother, Clara, allowed him to pursue his dream of becoming an artist, a decision that Alois would have strongly opposed. Clara's health, however, began to deteriorate, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Adolf cared for her devotedly until her death in December 1907. The loss of his mother, to whom he was deeply attached, was a profound blow to the young man, leaving him an orphan at the age of 18 and facing an uncertain future alone. After his mother's death, Adolf Hitler decided to move to Vienna, the grand capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He carried with him the ambition of becoming a great artist. Vienna, at the turn of the 20th century, was a vibrant cultural center, bustling with creativity and intellectual life. However, it was also a city of stark contrasts, with immense wealth existing alongside extreme poverty. Hitler hoped to enroll in the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts Vienna. He applied in 1907 and again in 1908, but on both occasions his application was rejected. The examiners felt his drawings showed some talent for architectural subjects, but lacked skill in portraying human figures. These rejections from the Art Academy were a bitter disappointment for Hitler. They shattered his dreams and left him feeling like a failure. Without a place at the Academy, he found himself adrift in the city. For several years, from roughly 1908 to 1913, he lived a difficult and impoverished existence in Vienna. He initially survived on a small inheritance and an orphan's pension, but these funds soon dwindled. He resorted to staying in homeless shelters and men's hostels. To earn a meager living, he painted postcards and small pictures, often depicting scenes of Vienna, which he would try to sell to tourists and shopkeepers. This period was marked by loneliness and a growing sense of bitterness. It was during these challenging years in Vienna that Hitler began to develop many of the extreme political and racial views that would later define his ideology. Vienna was a melting pot of different nationalities and cultures, but it was also a city where anti-Semitism, hatred and prejudice against Jewish people was widespread. He encountered various anti-Semitic pamphlets, newspapers and political movements. Figures like Karl Lueger, the anti-Semitic mayor of Vienna, and Georg von Schörnerer, a pan-German nationalist, influenced his thinking. He started to believe that Jewish people were responsible for many of society's problems and for his own personal failures. Hitler's time in Vienna was therefore crucial in shaping his worldview. He absorbed the prevailing anti-Semitic and nationalist sentiments, which provided him with scapegoats for his frustrations and disappointments. He also developed a strong admiration for Germany and a desire for the unification of all German-speaking peoples. The hardship he endured, combined with his exposure to radical ideologies, fostered a deep resentment and a conviction that drastic changes were needed. This period laid the dark foundation for his future political career, transforming a failed artist into a fervent ideologue filled with hatred and a desire for power. In May 1913, Adolf Hitler left Vienna and moved to Munich, the capital of Bavaria in Germany. He later claimed he left Austria to avoid military service for the Habsburg Empire, which he detested due to its multi-ethnic composition. However, he was eventually called up by the Austrian authorities but was deemed unfit for service due to his poor physical condition. When the First World War erupted in August 1914, Hitler was living in Munich. He enthusiastically volunteered for service in the Bavarian Army, a constituent part of the German Imperial Army. He saw the war as a glorious opportunity for Germany to assert its strength and for him to prove his own worth. Hitler was assigned to the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment, often called the List Regiment. He served primarily as a Meldeganger, a dispatch runner, a dangerous role that required him to carry messages between the trenches and command posts, often under heavy enemy fire. He saw action on the Western Front in both France and Belgium, participating in several major battles, including the First Battle of Ypres, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Arras, and the Battle of Passchendaele. Unlike many of his comrades, he seemed to embrace the dangers of war, finding a sense of purpose and belonging that had eluded him in civilian life. During his 4 years of service, Hitler was recognized for his bravery. He was promoted to the rank of Gefreiter, equivalent to a lance corporal, and was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class in December 1914. Later in August 1918, he received the Iron Cross First Class, a decoration rarely given to soldiers of his rank. These awards were a source of great pride for him. Despite his bravery, he was not considered officer material by his superiors, perhaps due to a perceived lack of leadership qualities or social skills. He remained a relatively isolated figure among his fellow soldiers, often seen reading or brooding rather than socializing. In October 1918, just weeks before the war ended, Hitler was temporarily blinded in a British mustard gas attack near Ypres. He was sent to a military hospital in Passwalk, Germany, to recover. It was while he was convalescing there that he learned of Germany's surrender and the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. The news of Germany's defeat and the subsequent revolution came as a profound shock and deeply embittered him. He, like many other German nationalists, refused to believe that the German army had been defeated on the battlefield. Instead, he subscribed to the stab-in-the-back myth, blaming Jews, Marxists, and civilian politicians for betraying the nation. This sense of betrayal fueled his determination to enter politics. After the end of the First World War, Hitler returned to Munich in early 1919. Germany was in a state of turmoil, grappling with defeat, economic hardship, and political instability. The Weimar Republic, a new democratic government, struggled to maintain order. Hitler, still technically in the army, was assigned to an intelligence unit of the Reichswehr, the German armed forces. His role involved monitoring various political groups that were emerging in the chaotic post-war environment. He also attended lectures designed to instill anti-communist and nationalist ideas in soldiers. It was during this period that his speaking abilities began to be noticed by his superiors. In September 1919, Hitler was ordered to investigate a small, obscure political group called the German Workers' Party, Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, or DAP. The DAP was a nationalist, anti-Semitic and anti-capitalist party. During one of its meetings, Hitler got into a heated argument with a speaker who advocated for Bavarian separatism. His passionate rebuttal impressed Anton Drexler, the party's founder, who invited him to join. Hitler, initially hesitant, soon saw an opportunity. He officially joined the DAP as its 55th member, though he would later claim to be the 7th, to make his early involvement seem more significant. He quickly realized the party could be a vehicle for his own political ambitions. Hitler's powerful oratory skills and fervent energy soon made him the dominant figure in the DAP. He became responsible for propaganda and public speaking, attracting larger and larger crowds to the party's meetings with his fiery speeches. He attacked the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed harsh terms on Germany after the war, and blamed Jews and communists for Germany's problems. In early 1920, the DAPP was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, or NSDAP, commonly known as the Nazi Party. Hitler designed the party's distinctive flag, featuring a swastika in a white circle on a red background, a potent symbol that would become infamous. Under Hitler's leadership, the Nazi Party grew steadily, particularly in Bavaria. He established the Sturmabteilung, SA, or Stormtroopers, a paramilitary wing of the party to protect Nazi meetings and disrupt those of rival political groups. The SA, also known as Brown Shirts, used violence and intimidation to further the party's aims. In July 1921, Hitler solidified his control over the party, becoming its chairman with almost dictatorial powers. He cultivated a cult of personality around himself, presenting himself as Germany's savior. The early Nazi Party was characterized by its extreme nationalism, virulent anti-Semitism, and its rejection of democracy, laying the groundwork for its future destructive path. In November 1923, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party attempted to seize power in Bavaria through an armed uprising known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The putsch, which began in a Munich beer hall, was poorly planned and quickly suppressed by the police and army. Several Nazis were killed, and Hitler himself was arrested and charged with high treason. His trial, however, provided him with a national platform to express his political views. He delivered impassioned speeches, portraying himself as a patriot fighting against a corrupt system. Although found guilty, he received a lenient sentence of 5 years in Landsberg prison, of which he served less than 9 months. It was during his time in Landsberg prison that Hitler began writing his political manifesto and autobiography, Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle. He dictated the first volume to his fellow prisoner and deputy, Rudolf Hess. The book was a rambling and often incoherent work, but it laid out his core ideology and his vision for Germany's future. Mein Kampf combined elements of autobiography with an exposition of Hitler's political and racial theories. It detailed his hatred for Jews, whom he blamed for all of Germany's misfortunes and saw as an international conspiracy aiming for world domination. He also outlined his belief in the superiority of the Aryan race. A central theme in Mein Kampf was the concept of, or living space. Hitler argued that Germany needed to expand its territory, particularly eastward into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, to acquire land and resources for the German people. This expansion would involve conquering and subjugating the Slavic populations, whom he considered racially inferior. The book also advocated for the establishment of a totalitarian state in Germany, with a single all-powerful leader, the Führer, to whom the people would owe absolute obedience. He rejected democracy, parliamentarianism, and international cooperation, promoting instead militarism and aggressive nationalism. Upon its release, Mein Kampf initially sold modestly. However, as Hitler and the Nazi Party gained prominence in the late 1920s and early 1930s, sales of the book soared, making him wealthy. It became a central text for Nazis and was widely distributed in Germany after he came to power. Millions of copies were printed, and it was often given as a gift to newly married couples or to soldiers. While many who read it at the time may have dismissed its more extreme ideas as mere rhetoric, Mein Kampf provided a chillingly clear blueprint for the horrors that Hitler would later unleash upon Germany and the world. To Section 6, From Chancellor to Dictator, the Consolidation of Absolute Power. After his release from Landsberg prison, Hitler focused on rebuilding the Nazi Party and gaining power through legal, political means, rather than violent revolution. The party initially struggled to gain widespread support during the relatively stable years of the mid-1920s in Germany. However, the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, which hit Germany particularly hard, created an environment of economic desperation and political instability that the Nazis were able to exploit. Unemployment soared, businesses failed, and many Germans lost faith in the democratic Weimar Republic. Hitler's powerful speeches promising to restore Germany's strength strength, create jobs, and defy the Treaty of Versailles resonated with a growing number of people. The Nazi Party's popularity surged in the early 1930s. In the parliamentary elections, their share of the vote increased dramatically, making them one of the largest parties in the Reichstag, the German parliament. Despite this, President Paul von Hindenburg, an elderly war hero, was reluctant to appoint Hitler as Chancellor, the head of government, as he distrusted Hitler and the Nazis' extremism. However, conservative politicians, believing they could control Hitler and use his popular support for their own ends, persuaded Hindenburg to make the appointment. On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, leading a coalition government. This was a pivotal moment in German history. Once in power, Hitler moved swiftly and ruthlessly to dismantle democracy and establish a totalitarian dictatorship. A key event was the Reichstag fire in February 1933, just a month after he became Chancellor. The Nazis blamed the fire on communists and used it as a pretext to issue an emergency decree, the Reichstag Fire Decree. This decree suspended basic civil liberties such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. It allowed the Nazis to arrest and imprison political opponents without trial. This was followed by the Enabling Act in March 1933, which effectively gave Hitler's government the power to make laws without the approval of the Reichstag for 4 years. With these new powers, Hitler systematically eliminated all opposition. Other political parties were either banned or forced to dissolve. Trade unions were abolished and replaced by the German Labour Front, controlled by the Nazis. The press, radio and arts were brought under Nazi control through the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, led by Joseph Goebbels. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and Reich Chancellor. He also made the army swear an oath of personal loyalty to him. Within 18 months, Germany had been transformed from a fragile democracy into a one-party Nazi dictatorship with Adolf Hitler as its absolute ruler. Section 7. The Shadow of the Swastika, the Horrors of the Holocaust. Once Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had consolidated their power in Germany, they began to systematically implement their racist and anti-Semitic ideology. The persecution of Jewish people, which had been a core tenet of Nazism from its inception, escalated dramatically. The Nazis aimed not only to discriminate against Jews, but to remove them entirely from German society and eventually from all of Europe. This systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators is known as the Holocaust, or the Shoah. It stands as one of the most horrific genocides in human history. The persecution began with discriminatory laws and propaganda. The Nuremberg laws, enacted in 1935, stripped Jews of their German citizenship, forbade marriage and sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews, and excluded Jews from many professions. Jewish businesses were boycotted and later Aryanized, meaning they were confiscated and transferred to non-Jewish ownership. Jewish children were expelled from public schools. Propaganda relentlessly portrayed Jews as enemies of the state and the German people, dehumanizing them and inciting hatred. A particularly violent pogrom known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, occurred in November 1938, during which synagogues were burned, Jewish businesses were destroyed, and many Jews were arrested or killed. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, and Germany's subsequent occupation of large parts of Europe, the Nazis' anti-Jewish policies became even more radical and brutal. Jews in occupied territories were forced to live in overcrowded, sealed-off areas called ghettos, where conditions were appalling, and starvation and disease were rampant. Mobile killing squads known as Einsatzgruppen followed the German army into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, systematically murdering hundreds of thousands of Jewish men, women and children, as well as Romani people and political commissars, often through mass shootings. These actions marked a shift towards outright extermination. The culmination of Nazi anti-Jewish policy was the final solution to the Jewish question, a euphemism for the planned genocide of European Jews. This plan was formalized at the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. The Nazis established a network of extermination camps, or death camps, primarily in occupied Poland, such as Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor and Belzec. Jews from all over Europe were transported to these camps in horrific conditions, often in cattle wagons. Upon arrival, many were sent directly to gas chambers where they were murdered with poison gas. Others were subjected to forced labor, starvation, medical experiments, and brutal treatment until they died. Millions of non-Jewish victims, including Romani people, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, disabled individuals, and political opponents, were also murdered by the Nazi regime. Section 8. War across the world. The course of the Second World War. Adolf Hitler's aggressive foreign policy and his ambition to create a vast German empire, or Lebensraum, in Eastern Europe inevitably led to the outbreak of the Second World War. After annexing Austria in 1938, the Anschluss, and occupying Czechoslovakia, Hitler turned his attention to Poland. On the 1st of September 1939, German forces invaded Poland using a new form of warfare called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, which involved swift, coordinated attacks by tanks, motorized infantry, and air power. In response to the invasion, Britain and France, who had pledged to support Poland, declared war on Germany 2 days later, marking the official beginning of World War II in Europe. In the early stages of the war, Germany achieved a series of stunning military victories. Poland was defeated within weeks, partitioned between Germany and the Soviet Union, which had signed a non-aggression pact with Germany in August 1939. In the spring of 1940, German forces launched a surprise attack on Western Europe, rapidly conquering Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. The British Expeditionary Force was forced to evacuate from Dunkirk. By the summer of 1940, much of continental Europe was under Nazi control or allied with Germany. Hitler then launched the Battle of Britain, an air campaign aimed at gaining air superiority over Britain to prepare for an invasion, but the Royal Air Force successfully defended the country. A major turning point in the war came in June 1941 when Hitler, breaking the Non-Aggression Pact, launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. Initially, the German advance was swift and they captured vast territories. However, the Soviet Union proved to be a formidable opponent, and the harsh Russian winter, coupled with stiff Soviet resistance, halted the German offensive outside Moscow. The entry of the United States into the war in December 1941 after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor further tipped the balance of power against Germany and its Axis partners, Italy and Japan. The war became a truly global conflict. The tide began to turn definitively against Germany in 1942 and 1943. The German defeat at the Battle of Stalingrad on the Eastern Front in the winter of 1942-43 was a catastrophic loss from which the German army never fully recovered. In North Africa, British and American forces defeated German and Italian troops. The Allies then invaded Italy in 1943, leading to Mussolini's downfall. On the 6th of June 1944, D-Day Allied forces landed in Normandy, France, opening a major second front in Western Europe. German forces were now being pushed back on all fronts. Despite increasingly desperate measures, including the V-1 and V-2 terror weapons, Germany's military situation became hopeless. Section 9. The Final Days and a Terrible Legacy. Lessons from a Dark Era. By early 1945, Germany was on the brink of total collapse. Allied armies were advancing from the west, and Soviet forces were closing in from the east. German cities were being devastated by relentless bombing campaigns. Adolf Hitler, increasingly isolated and delusional, retreated to his underground bunker, the Führerbunker, beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. From this subterranean complex, he continued to issue futile orders to non-existent armies, refusing to accept the reality of defeat. His physical and mental health deteriorated rapidly. He was plagued by tremors, paranoia, and fits of rage, a shadow of the charismatic leader who had once mesmerized millions. As Soviet troops fought their way into the heart of Berlin, Hitler made his final preparations. On the 29th of April 1945, he married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a small civil ceremony in the bunker. He also dictated his last will and political testament, blaming the war on international Jewry, and appointing Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor. The following day, on the 30th of April 1945, with Soviet soldiers just a few hundred meters away, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. Braun took cyanide, while Hitler is believed to have taken cyanide and shot himself in the head. Their bodies were carried outside, doused in petrol, and burned in the Chancellery Garden as per Hitler's instructions. Hitler's death and the subsequent unconditional surrender of Germany on the 7th and 8th of May 1945 marked the end of the Third Reich and the Second World War in Europe. His regime left behind a legacy of unparalleled destruction, death and suffering. An estimated 50 to 80 million people perished in the war, including the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Entire countries were devastated and the political map of the world was redrawn. The horrors perpetrated under Hitler's leadership exposed the depths of human cruelty and the catastrophic consequences of unchecked power, extreme nationalism and racial hatred. The life and leadership of Adolf Hitler offer profound and enduring lessons for humanity. They underscore the immense dangers of dictatorship and the vital importance of upholding democratic values, human rights and the rule of law. His rise to power demonstrates how propaganda, fear-mongering and the exploitation of economic hardship can undermine democracy. It highlights the necessity of critical thinking, media literacy and vigilance against hate speech and intolerance in all its forms. Remembering the atrocities of the Nazi era is crucial not only to honor the victims, but also to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. The promotion of tolerance, empathy and international cooperation remains essential to preventing future tyrants and genocides.